Suge Knight. On January 29, 2015, Marion Suge Knight's empire came crashing down in a Compton parking lot. The co-founder of Death Row Records, who had shaped hip-hop's golden era alongside Dr. Dre and Tupac Shakur, drove his Ford Raptor into two men outside Tam's Burgers. Terry Carter died from the impact, while CLE Bone Sloan suffered crushed ankles and head injuries. The incident happened after an argument on the set of the film Straight Outta Compton, a movie Knight felt portrayed him unfairly. What led this music mogul to such a violent act? Surveillance footage captured the entire scene. Surveillance footage showed Knight accelerating forward to strike Sloan first, then reversing over him, and finally accelerating forward again to run over both Sloan and Terry Carter before fleeing the scene. He turned himself in 12 hours later, claiming he acted in self-defense against what he described as an ambush. Prosecutors painted a different picture: anger over his exclusion from the Straight Outta Compton film, and resentment about being portrayed as a violent enforcer. The investigation moved quickly. A grand jury indicted Knight not just for the hit and run, but also for threats he allegedly made against director F. Gary Gray. Sloan testified that he never had a weapon, contradicting Knight's self-defense claims. The video evidence proved devastating, showing deliberate actions rather than a panicked escape. For 3 years, Knight contested the charges. His legal team argued he suffered from PTSD and feared for his life, even claiming Dr. Dre had orchestrated a murder-for-hire plot against him, allegations Dre denied. But on September 20, 2018, Knight pleaded no contest to voluntary manslaughter, with other charges dismissed as part of the agreement. The sentencing hearing on October 4, 2018, brought raw emotion. Carter's daughter confronted Knight directly, telling him, "You callously murdered my dad." The judge handed down 28 years, 22 for the hit and run, and 6 more due to Knight's prior convictions triggering California's 3 strikes law. Knight's appeals have failed. In June 2023, a California appeals court denied Knight's petition for a writ of habeas corpus, rejecting his claims that his trial counsel was ineffective and that he had been coerced into the plea deal. Meanwhile, civil litigation continues, with a mistrial declared in 2022 because the jury deadlocked 10-2 in favor of Knight. A retrial for the wrongful death lawsuit filed by Terry Carter's family began in early 2025. The man who once commanded respect across the music industry now sits in Richard J. Donovan Correctional Facility, where he won't be eligible for parole until 2034. Death Row Records, the label that defined West Coast hip-hop, is now just a memory. Knight's career ended not with a chart-topping album, but with a guilty plea in a courtroom. The music mogul who helped launch careers worth millions will spend his remaining years behind bars, his legacy forever tied to that fatal afternoon in Compton. The next case would take us from the music industry to the world of television. Allison Mack. Allison Mack arrived in Hollywood with dreams of stardom, landing the role of Chloe Sullivan on the hit series Smallville. For 7 seasons, she played the loyal best friend to Superman. But off-screen, Mack was building a different kind of empire within XIVM, a self-help organization that prosecutors would later expose as a criminal operation. Mack became a high-ranking member of NXIVM and co-created DOS, a secret subgroup that coerced women into what it called slavery. Using her celebrity status, she recruited women like India Oxenberg, the daughter of actress Catherine Oxenberg. The women were required to provide collateral, compromising photos, family secrets, anything that could destroy their lives if released. But what really happened inside DOS? The victims were branded near their hip with a symbol that was initially described as elements or a talisman, but was later revealed to be a fusion of the letters K, R, A, and M, representing the initials of both Keith Raniere and Allison Mack. They were subjected to starvation, forced to seduce Raniere, and endured other humiliating acts. Mack provided investigators with audio recordings that became key evidence, including discussions about the branding ceremonies. The FBI arrested Mack in April 2018 alongside other NXIVM leaders. Victim testimonies revealed the scope of the operation: coercion, manipulation, and exploitation masked as female empowerment. Jessica Joan, one of the victims, described being assigned to seduce Raniere and forced into compromising situations. Initially, Mack maintained her innocence. She believed DOS empowered women, that Raniere was a visionary. But as evidence mounted, she pleaded guilty in April 2019 to racketeering and conspiracy charges. More importantly, she agreed to cooperate against Raniere, who would later receive 120 years. Mack's cooperation proved extensive. She provided audio recordings, testified about the inner workings of DOS, and helped prosecutors understand the psychological manipulation techniques used within NXIVM. Joan later stated, "These are evil monsters who need consequences," reflecting the anger many victims felt. On June 30, 2021, Mack was sentenced to just 3 years, far below what prosecutors could have sought. The leniency came from her cooperation and what the judge saw as genuine remorse. In a statement, Mack called joining NXIVM the biggest mistake of her life, saying she had lied to protect a delusion. She was released early in July 2023. The actress, who once commanded millions of viewers, now lives in obscurity. A civil lawsuit was filed in January 2020 by 80 plaintiffs against the NXIVM leadership, including Mack, alleging that the organization was a pyramid scheme that used systematic mental and physical abuse to exploit its members. Mack's career in Hollywood is over, her name forever linked to one of the most disturbing cult cases in recent history. While Mack's sentence was measured in years, our next case involves someone who will never walk free. Corey Miller, C. Murder. January 12, 2002, started as a typical night at Harvey's Platinum Club in New Orleans. Corey Miller, known in the rap world as C. Murder and brother to Master P, was there when a brawl erupted. In the chaos, 16-year-old Steve Thomas, a fan who had come to see the rapper perform, was shot in the chest. The aspiring young man died from his wounds. Witnesses saw Miller reach into the crowd and fire the fatal shot. The investigation led to Miller's arrest on January 18, 2002, just days after the incident. By February 28, he was formally indicted. But the case would take years to resolve, marked by witness recantations, allegations of jury pressure, and multiple trials. What made this case so complex? The first trial in 2003 resulted in a conviction, but it was overturned because the prosecution failed to disclose the criminal backgrounds of several key witnesses, which could have been used by the defense to challenge their credibility. In 2009, Miller faced a second trial. The jury deadlocked, but under Louisiana law at the time, a 10-2 verdict was sufficient for conviction. On August 14, 2009, Miller was sentenced to life without parole. Eyewitness testimony formed the backbone of the prosecution's case. Witnesses like Darnell Jordan and Kenneth Jordan identified Miller despite expressing fear about testifying. The court even admitted hearsay testimony about witness intimidation, highlighting concerns about tampering. Prosecutors also brought charges against Miller's associates for allegedly trying to influence witnesses. Miller has maintained his innocence throughout. His appeals have centered on witness credibility and the non-unanimous jury verdict. In 2018, 2 key witnesses recanted their testimony, claiming they felt pressured to identify Miller. One witness stated they lied under oath, admitting the initial testimony was false. The case gained renewed attention when celebrities like Kim Kardashian and Monica championed Miller's cause, arguing the conviction was unjust. In November 2023, a Louisiana judge denied Miller's application for post-conviction relief, ruling that the recanted testimonies of Darnell and Kenneth Jordan were not reliable enough to warrant a new trial given the other evidence presented. Steve Thomas's mother has spoken about the lasting pain, saying, "We cry every day," and mourning that she will never have a grandchild from her son. Her victim impact statement painted a picture of a family forever shattered by that nightclub shooting. Miller is currently serving his life sentence at the Elaine Hunt Correctional Center in St. Gabriel, Louisiana, where he continues to fight his conviction. The rapper who once topped charts and sold millions of records now spends his days in a cell. His music career ended by a conviction he insists is wrong. Whether the recanted testimonies will ever lead to his release remains uncertain, but for now, C. Murder's story serves as a cautionary tale about how quickly fame can turn to infamy. From the hip-hop world, we move to a music legend whose dark side would emerge in tragedy. Phil Spector. Phil Spector revolutionized music production with his wall of sound technique, creating hits for artists from the Ronettes to the Beatles. But on February 3, 2003, his legacy would be forever stained when actress Lana Clarkson was found shot in the mouth at his Alhambra mansion. Clarkson, a 40-year-old actress who had worked in films like Barbarian Queen, met Spector at the House of Blues where she was working as a hostess. Spector invited her back to his home, a sprawling estate known as the Pyrenees Castle. Hours later, his driver heard a gunshot. When he entered, he saw Spector holding a gun, and Spector allegedly said, "I think I killed someone." What happened in those final hours? The driver immediately called 911, and Spector was arrested at the scene. Clarkson sat slumped in a chair, shot through the mouth. Spector's defense team would argue she committed self-harm, that the music producer was simply in the wrong place at the wrong time. But the investigation revealed a disturbing pattern. Prosecutors brought forward 4 women who testified that Spector had previously threatened them with weapons when they tried to leave his home. These weren't isolated incidents. They painted a picture of a man who used violence and intimidation to control women. The testimonies established what prosecutors called a pattern of pulling guns on women who rejected him. Forensic evidence complicated Spector's claims. No fingerprints were found on the weapon, but DNA evidence was found on the grip of the gun that belonged to Phil Spector, and forensic experts noted that the absence of fingerprints is common on rough surfaces, like a pistol grip. Blood spatter analysis suggested the gun was fired from across the room, not by someone holding it in their own mouth. The first trial in 2007 ended in a hung jury, with jurors unable to reach a unanimous verdict. But prosecutors weren't finished. In 2009, a second trial resulted in a guilty verdict for second-degree murder. The jury rejected Spector's self-harm theory, convinced by the pattern of behavior and forensic evidence. On May 29, 2009, Spector was sentenced to 19 years to life. Throughout the proceedings, he maintained his innocence, insisting Clarkson had taken her own life. His ex-wife, Ronnie Spector, later spoke about years of control and threatening behavior during their marriage, adding context to the testimonies from other women. Appeals followed, but courts upheld the conviction in 2011, and a habeas petition was denied in 2015. Spector remained imprisoned until January 2021, when he died from complications related to illness. The man who had shaped the sound of a generation died behind bars, his musical genius overshadowed by his final violent act. The music producer's fall was complete, but our next case involves another music icon whose crimes were far more extensive: R. Kelly. For decades, Robert Sylvester Kelly dominated R&B with hits like I Believe I Can Fly and Ignition. Behind the platinum records and sold-out concerts, however, Kelly was operating a criminal enterprise built on exploitation. The pattern began early in Kelly's career and continued for over 2 decades. He groomed vulnerable individuals, isolated them from families, and created an environment of complete control. In 1994, he bribed an official to obtain a fake ID to marry 15-year-old singer Aaliyah, a marriage later annulled. This would be just the beginning. How did Kelly maintain this operation for so long? He used his fame as a weapon, targeting aspiring singers and fans. Victims described being brought to Kelly's studios or homes, where they were controlled through intimidation and manipulation. Kelly produced material documenting the encounters, evidence that would later be used against him in court. Whispers about Kelly's behavior circulated for years, but prosecution proved difficult. Witnesses were intimidated, evidence was suppressed, and Kelly's legal team successfully deflected accusations. The 2019 documentary, Surviving R. Kelly, changed everything. Survivors spoke on camera about their experiences, prompting federal investigations in New York and Chicago. Arrests followed quickly. In the 2021 New York trial, prosecutors presented testimony from victims who described years of manipulation. The evidence included material Kelly had produced, medical records showing he had transmitted infections, and testimony about the bribe for Aaliyah's fake ID. Kelly was convicted on all counts, including racketeering. The 2022 Chicago trial focused on additional charges. Kelly was found guilty on multiple counts related to exploitation. Victims testified about being underage when Kelly targeted them, including detailed accounts from Jerhonda Pace and others. Throughout both trials, Kelly denied the accusations. He had released a song called I Admit that addressed but refuted many claims. In interviews, he maintained his innocence, portraying himself as the victim of a conspiracy. Kelly was sentenced to 30 years in New York in June 2022 and received 20 years for the Chicago case in February 2023, with 19 of those years ordered to run concurrently with his New York sentence. Appeals have been unsuccessful. In 2025, the New York conviction was upheld, and in 2024, the Chicago conviction was similarly affirmed. The Supreme Court declined to hear his case. Streaming platforms like Spotify and YouTube have removed much of his music, and his former collaborators have distanced themselves. Kelly's legacy is now defined not by his music, but by the survivors who found their voices. The R&B superstar will likely spend the rest of his life in federal prison, his career obliterated by the weight of his crimes. While Kelly's criminal enterprise spanned decades, our next case involves a mogul whose fall would be even more public. P. Diddy, Sean Combs. Sean Diddy Combs built an empire. From Bad Boy Records to fashion lines and spirits brands, he became one of hip-hop's wealthiest moguls. But in September 2024, federal agents arrested him at a Manhattan hotel, charging him with offenses that would destroy everything he had built. The indictment alleged Combs orchestrated transportation across state lines for illicit purposes. Federal prosecutors described a pattern of behavior spanning years, involving elaborate parties and careful logistics. The charges represented the culmination of investigations that had been building since late 2023. What evidence led to these charges? A video surfaced in May 2024 showing Combs in a violent altercation with former partner Cassie Ventura at a Los Angeles hotel in 2016. The footage obtained by CNN showed behavior that contradicted Combs' public denials. He later issued an apology video calling his actions disgusting and taking full responsibility. But the video was just one piece of evidence. Federal investigators had been gathering testimony from multiple witnesses, examining financial records, and documenting a pattern of behavior. The indictment focused on two specific counts related to transportation for unlawful purposes. Combs pleaded not guilty and maintained that all interactions were consensual. His legal team argued that prosecutors were overreaching, using isolated incidents to build a narrative that didn't reflect reality. The trial would test these competing versions of events. In July 2025, a jury returned its verdict. Combs was acquitted on the more serious charges, including allegations of coercion. However, he was convicted on 2 counts related to transportation. The mixed verdict suggested jurors believed some conduct was criminal while rejecting the broader narrative of systematic exploitation. Sentencing brought controversy. On October 3, 2025, Judge Arun Subramanian sentenced Combs to 50 months, approximately 4 years and 2 months, in federal prison, specifically noting that he was not using acquitted conduct to enhance the sentence despite the controversy surrounding the practice. This practice, while legal, sparked debate about whether defendants should face enhanced sentences for acts a jury rejected. Combs' fall has been dramatic. Endorsement deals evaporated, business partnerships dissolved, and his reputation lies in ruins. The mogul who once commanded rooms now faces years behind bars. His case raised questions about power dynamics in the entertainment industry and the accountability of those at the top. Federal custody now defines Combs' reality. The Bad Boy Records founder who shaped hip-hop for a generation will spend his immediate future in prison. Appeals are expected, particularly around the acquitted conduct sentencing. But for now, the music mogul's empire has crumbled. His downfall came not in the streets of hip-hop, but in a federal courtroom, proving that no amount of fame or fortune provides immunity from prosecution. The next case would shift from music to film, where another powerful mogul's crimes would catalyze an entire movement. Harvey Weinstein. Harvey Weinstein stood at the pinnacle of Hollywood. As co-founder of Miramax and the Weinstein Company, he produced films that won Academy Awards and launched careers. Movies like Pulp Fiction, The English Patient, and Shakespeare in Love bore his stamp. But behind the red carpets and Oscar speeches, Weinstein was using his power to harm women for decades. The allegations against Weinstein dated back to the 1990s, involving actresses, production assistants, and journalists. Women described being called to hotel rooms for what they thought were business meetings, only to face unwanted advances. Many signed settlements with non-disclosure agreements, their stories buried by legal agreements and fear of career retaliation. What finally broke Weinstein's wall of silence? In October 2017, the New York Times and the New Yorker published investigations detailing decades of allegations. More than 80 women came forward with accounts spanning years. The stories shared common elements: promises of career advancement, isolated hotel rooms, and threats of professional destruction for those who refused or spoke out. The revelations sparked the #MeToo movement, encouraging survivors across industries to share their experiences. Weinstein initially denied the allegations, claiming all interactions were consensual. His representatives pointed to what they called a complex history, with some accusers suggesting relationships rather than offenses. Criminal investigations began in New York and California. In 2020, Weinstein was convicted in New York on charges involving 2 women. The trial heard testimony from multiple witnesses about Weinstein's pattern of behavior. He was sentenced to 23 years in prison. But in 2024, New York's highest court overturned the conviction, ruling that the judge had improperly allowed testimony from women whose allegations weren't part of the charges. Prosecutors announced plans for a retrial, consolidating the original case with new allegations. The New York retrial concluded in June 2025 with a split verdict. Weinstein was convicted of a criminal intimate act against Miriam Haley, but the jury acquitted him on the charge involving Kaya Sokola and reached a deadlocked mistrial on the final assault charge. In February 2023, Weinstein was sentenced to 16 years in California, and in late 2024, the California Court of Appeal denied his attempt to overturn that conviction, leaving that 16-year term intact regardless of the outcome in New York. The California conviction involved testimony about encounters at Beverly Hills hotels. with prosecutors arguing Weinstein had used his industry position to target vulnerable women. The legal proceedings have been complex, with some convictions overturned while others stand. Weinstein has maintained his innocence throughout, with his legal team arguing that encounters were consensual and that he's being prosecuted for behavior that, while perhaps inappropriate, wasn't criminal. Weinstein remains in custody, his health reportedly declining while awaiting the New York retrial. The mogul who once commanded respect from Hollywood's elite now sits in prison, his company dissolved and his legacy destroyed. The #MeToo movement he inadvertently sparked has changed how industries handle power and accountability. If you've made it this far and enjoy deep dives into the most shocking criminal cases, hit that subscribe button and don't forget to press the bell icon. From Hollywood's fall, we turn to another case that exposed how power enabled harm for years. Ghislaine Maxwell. Ghislaine Maxwell moved through elite circles with ease, the daughter of disgraced media tycoon Robert Maxwell. She cultivated relationships with powerful figures across business, politics, and royalty. But her most significant connection was to financier Jeffrey Epstein, a relationship that would ultimately destroy her life. For years, Maxwell acted as Epstein's closest associate, managing his properties and social calendar. But prosecutors argued her role went far deeper. She recruited vulnerable individuals, normalized inappropriate behavior, and facilitated Epstein's criminal activities. The operation spanned from the 1990s into the 2000s, targeting those seeking opportunities or already facing difficult circumstances. How did this operation continue for so long? Maxwell used her social status and connections to gain trust. She would approach individuals at beaches, schools, or through existing connections, offering mentorship or opportunities. Once trust was established, she would bring them into Epstein's orbit, facilitating encounters and ensuring their silence through intimidation and payoffs. After Epstein's 2019 arrest and subsequent death in custody, attention turned to Maxwell. She went into hiding, eventually located at a New Hampshire estate in July 2020. FBI agents found her in a property purchased through a carefully disguised transaction, suggesting she had been preparing to avoid prosecution. The December 2021 trial brought survivors face-to-face with Maxwell. 4 women testified about their experiences, describing how Maxwell had recruited them and facilitated their encounters with Epstein. One witness, known as Jane, testified about being just 14 when Maxwell first approached her. The testimony painted a picture of calculated manipulation and betrayal of trust. Maxwell's defense argued she was being scapegoated for Epstein's crimes, that prosecutors needed someone to blame after his death. Her legal team suggested the relationships were consensual and that Maxwell had no knowledge of wrongdoing. While Maxwell has maintained her innocence in media interviews, the U.S. Second Circuit Court of Appeals officially upheld her conviction in September 2024, affirming that her 20-year sentence was appropriate despite her claims of a prior immunity deal. The jury disagreed. On December 29, 2021, Maxwell was convicted on 5 counts related to facilitating Epstein's activities. The verdict came after 5 days of deliberation, with jurors finding her guilty of conspiracy and participation in the operation. On June 28, 2022, Maxwell was sentenced to 20 years in federal prison. The judge rejected arguments that she deserved leniency, emphasizing the harm caused to survivors and Maxwell's lack of remorse. The sentence ensures she will likely spend the remainder of her productive years behind bars. Appeals followed quickly. Maxwell's legal team argued that a prior plea deal involving Epstein should have protected her from prosecution. They also challenged jury selection, claiming one juror had failed to disclose relevant personal history. Courts rejected these arguments, upholding the conviction. Maxwell remains in federal custody, her privileged life replaced by prison routine. The socialite who once mingled with presidents and princes now serves time in a Florida correctional facility. The next case involves a different kind of power structure that allegedly protected wrongdoing for years. Danny Masterson. Danny Masterson built his career on comedy, starring as Stephen Hyde on that 70s show for 8 seasons. The role made him a household name and led to other projects, including the Netflix series The Ranch. But allegations emerging in 2017 would reveal a darker reality behind the sitcom star's public image. 3 women came forward with allegations about incidents in the early 2000s. All 3 were connected to the Church of Scientology, as was Masterson. They described being attacked while incapacitated, unable to give consent. The allegations dated to 2001 and 2003, yet criminal charges wouldn't come until 2020. Why did it take so long for charges to be filed? The victims testified that church officials explicitly threatened them with disconnection, a practice of shunning that would separate them from their families and community, if they reported the assaults to the police. The organization's practice of handling matters internally allegedly prevented earlier investigation. When women did eventually report to police, the cases stalled for years before prosecution. Masterson was arrested in June 2020 and charged with multiple counts. He maintained his innocence, with his legal team arguing that the encounters were consensual and that the allegations were part of an anti-Scientology campaign. The church denied any involvement in suppressing reports. The first trial in 2022 ended in a hung jury, with jurors unable to reach unanimous verdicts on any counts. Prosecutors immediately announced they would retry the case. The second trial began in 2023, with largely the same evidence but different jury dynamics. During the retrial, witnesses testified about being attacked while incapacitated. The prosecution presented evidence about the state of the victims at the time of the incidents. Masterson's defense argued the encounters were consensual and suggested memory issues compromised the testimonies. Medical evidence became contested territory. Defense toxicologists challenged prosecution claims about incapacitation, arguing that the victims' descriptions didn't match expected effects. Prosecutors countered with testimony about the victims' states and their inability to consent. On May 31, 2023, the jury convicted Masterson on 2 of 3 counts. They remained deadlocked on the 3rd count. Victims delivered impact statements at sentencing, with one calling him a predator who had used his position and connections to avoid accountability. On September 7, 2023, Masterson was sentenced to 30 years to life. The judge emphasized the seriousness of the crimes and the harm caused to the victims. Given the sentence structure, Masterson will be in his 70s before becoming eligible for parole. In April 2025, a California appellate court upheld Masterson's conviction, ruling that the trial court acted properly in allowing evidence regarding the Church of Scientology's internal policies and the victims' fear of retaliation. Masterson's acting career ended immediately. Netflix fired him from The Ranch when allegations surfaced, and reruns of That 70s Show have been complicated by his presence. The comedy star now serves time in California's prison system, his legacy permanently tarnished. While Masterson's case involved allegations against adults, our next case centers on someone whose platform gave access to vulnerable populations. Jared Fogle. Jared Fogle became famous for losing weight. His Subway sandwich diet success story turned into a national advertising campaign that ran for 15 years. He appeared in commercials, visited schools, and established himself as a health advocate. Behind this wholesome image, however, Fogle was engaging in activities that would horrify the public. Federal investigators began examining Fogle after the 2015 arrest of Russell Taylor, the executive director of Fogle's foundation dedicated to fighting childhood obesity. Taylor was charged with producing harmful material involving individuals, and evidence suggested Fogel had received some of this material. What did investigators find? FBI agents executed a search warrant at Fogel's Indiana home in July 2015. The investigation uncovered text messages, travel records, and digital files that documented Fogel's activities. Evidence showed he had traveled to engage in prohibited conduct and possessed material he had received from Taylor. Fogel's foundation, ironically established to help young people develop healthy habits, had allegedly provided him access to potential victims. The investigation revealed that his public persona as a health advocate was a cover for disturbing private behavior. Text messages showed Fogel discussing his preferences and activities. Facing overwhelming evidence, Fogel agreed to plead guilty in August 2015. The plea agreement involved charges related to both travel for illicit purposes and possession of harmful material. Prosecutors agreed to recommend a sentence between 5 and 12 years, but the judge wasn't bound by this recommendation. The November 2015 sentencing hearing brought victims face-to-face with Fogel. At his 2015 sentencing, one victim chose to address the court directly, while the judge reviewed written impact statements from many others. Fogel apologized, calling his behavior a horrible mistake and saying he had screwed up my life. He claimed to have a medical problem and expressed remorse for his actions. Prosecutors argued his apology was insufficient given the calculated nature of his behavior and the number of victims. The judge rejected the plea agreement's recommended range and sentenced Fogel to 15 years and 8 months, emphasizing the seriousness of his crimes and the harm to victims. The sentence also included lifetime supervised release and substantial restitution payments to victims. Subway immediately cut all ties, removing Fogel from advertising and distancing the brand from the scandal. The Jared Foundation was dissolved. Fogel's fame transformed overnight from celebrated success story to cautionary tale about predators hiding behind public personas. Jared Fogel is currently incarcerated at FCI Englewood, and according to the Federal Bureau of Prisons, his projected release date is July 11, 2029. The next case would reveal that depravity exists even in industries built on art and music. Ian Watkins. Ian Watkins fronted the Welsh rock band Lost Prophets, a group that achieved significant success in the early 2000s. Their albums went platinum, they toured internationally, and Watkins developed a devoted fan base. But behind the stage persona, Watkins was engaging in activities so disturbing that even seasoned investigators were shocked. Police began investigating Watkins in 2008 after receiving information about his behavior. The investigation was complex, involving digital forensics and multiple jurisdictions. Evidence eventually uncovered included communications, videos, and plans that revealed the extent of Watkins's activities. How did authorities build their case? Watkins had been communicating with others about his activities and intentions. These communications, recovered from encrypted devices and online platforms, provided investigators with detailed evidence. The material included discussions using phrases like mega lols when describing his activities, showing a disturbing lack of understanding about the severity of his actions. Watkins was arrested in December 2012. However, while he was arrested alongside others, the two women most closely associated with the case were mothers of children he abused, and they were charged with conspiring with him and cruelty. Initially, he denied everything, calling the allegations mad and insisting he was being targeted. His legal team prepared to fight the charges, but in November 2013, facing overwhelming evidence, Watkins pleaded guilty to 11 charges. The charges included attempted serious harm and multiple counts related to prohibited material. The two women also pleaded guilty to related charges. The guilty pleas came at the last minute, sparing victims from having to testify. The sentencing hearing exposed the full depravity of Watkins's actions. The judge described the case as breaking new ground in terms of seriousness, stating that the evidence revealed behavior at the most extreme end of the spectrum. Prosecutors detailed how Watkins had used his fame and position to manipulate others into participating. On December 18, 2013, Watkins was sentenced to 35 years, consisting of 29 years imprisonment and 6 years on extended license. The judge emphasized that Watkins showed no genuine remorse and posed a continuing danger. The two women received sentences of 14 and 17 years, respectively. Lost Prophets immediately disbanded. The band's members issued statements expressing shock and disgust, distancing themselves completely from their former frontman. Music retailers removed the band's albums from shelves, and streaming platforms flagged their content. Watkins remained in custody at HMP Wakefield, a high-security facility housing the most dangerous offenders. He was reportedly attacked multiple times by other inmates who viewed his crimes as particularly heinous, even by prison standards. On October 11, 2025, Ian Watkins died at HMP Wakefield after being stabbed in the neck during a planned assault. 2 inmates were subsequently charged with his murder. He was 48 years old and had served just over a decade of his sentence. His death brought mixed reactions. Some viewed it as appropriate consequences for his crimes, while others argued that prison violence undermines the justice system. His victims, now adults, continue to live with the trauma of his actions. While Watkins's crimes shocked the music world, our next case involves someone who shaped media coverage itself. Max Clifford. Max Clifford was Britain's most famous public relations guru, representing everyone from celebrities to politicians for over 4 decades. He built a career managing media narratives, shaping public perception, and controlling scandal. But Operation Yewtree, the investigation launched after the Jimmy Savile revelations, would expose Clifford's own history of wrongdoing. 8 women came forward with allegations dating from 1966 to 1984, describing encounters when they were seeking publicity or representation. The incidents occurred at his offices in New Bond Street, but also at his home in Surrey and at a Spanish villa where he would meet with aspiring models, actresses, and others seeking media exposure. What pattern emerged from these testimonies? The women described similar scenarios, meetings about career opportunities that turned inappropriate. Clifford allegedly used his position and influence to coerce young women, exploiting their desire for publicity and their trust in his professional reputation. The allegations spanned nearly 2 decades, suggesting a long-standing pattern of behavior. Clifford was arrested in December 2012 as part of Operation Yewtree, the wide-ranging investigation into historical offenses by celebrities and public figures. He vehemently denied all allegations, claiming they were fabricated by women seeking attention or money. His defense characterized the accusers as unreliable witnesses motivated by compensation claims. The trial at Southwark Crown Court in 2014 heard testimony from the 8 women. Each described their experiences in Clifford's office, detailing similar patterns despite the incidents occurring years apart. The consistency of their accounts strengthened the prosecution's case that this represented habitual behavior rather than isolated misunderstandings. Clifford's defense emphasized his age at the time of trial. He was 71, and argued that the allegations were too old to be fairly prosecuted. They challenged the credibility of individual witnesses and suggested that cultural attitudes toward workplace behavior had been different in the 1960s through 1980s. On April 28, 2014, the jury convicted Clifford on 8 counts of indecent assault relating to 4 victims, though he was originally tried for counts involving 7. The convictions represented offenses against 4 different individuals. On May 2, 2014, Clifford was sentenced to 8 years in prison. The judge noted that Clifford had shown no remorse and had used his position of power to take advantage of vulnerable young women seeking his professional help. The sentence reflected both the seriousness of the offenses and the pattern of behavior they represented. Clifford's conviction stunned the British media industry. The PR guru who had controlled so many narratives couldn't control his own. His business collapsed, his reputation destroyed by the same type of scandal he had spent decades managing for clients. Clifford's health declined in prison, and he died on December 10, 2017, from congestive heart failure. He had served 3 years of his sentence, maintaining his innocence until his death. His passing sparked debate about Operation Yewtree's effectiveness and the importance of believing historical allegations. The next case involves another British entertainer whose wholesome image hid darker actions. Rolf Harris. Rolf Harris was a beloved figure in British and Australian entertainment. Known for his paintings, his novelty songs like Tie Me Kangaroo Down Sport, and his television programs spanning decades, he entertained children, painted portraits of Queen Elizabeth II, and received numerous honors, including being made a CBE. But Operation Yewtree would reveal that Harris had been harming individuals for decades. 12 allegations emerged covering incidents from 1968 to 1986. The victims ranged in age from childhood to adulthood, with incidents allegedly occurring at public events, television studios, and during Harris's tours. The allegations described inappropriate touching during autograph sessions, at charity events, and during television appearances. How did Harris maintain his reputation despite these incidents? His celebrity status and wholesome public image provided cover. Victims described feeling that they wouldn't be believed if they reported what happened, particularly given Harris's position as a national treasure. Some were very young when incidents occurred and didn't fully understand what had happened until years later. Harris was arrested in March 2013 and charged in August of that year. Unlike some Operation Yewtree defendants, Harris initially maintained a lower profile, but his legal team vigorously contested the charges. The defense argued that Harris was a physically demonstrative person who would touch fans during public appearances, but that this was innocent rather than inappropriate. The trial at Southwark Crown Court in 2014 heard testimony from multiple witnesses. Prosecutors built a case showing a pattern of behavior spanning decades. The evidence was largely testimonial, as forensic evidence for such historical cases was unavailable. One witness described feeling ashamed about what had happened. On June 30, 2014, Harris was convicted on 12 counts. The jury found the witnesses credible despite the absence of physical evidence and the passage of time. The convictions represented incidents involving 4 individuals, showing a consistent pattern of inappropriate behavior at various events and locations. On July 4, 2014, Harris was sentenced to 5 years and 9 months. The judge emphasized the violation of trust involved, particularly given Harris's position as someone working with young people through his entertainment career. The sentence reflected the seriousness of the offenses while considering Harris's age. He was 84 at sentencing. The conviction shattered Harris's legacy. He was stripped of honors, including his CBE, his artwork was removed from public display, and his television programs were pulled from broadcast. The man who had entertained generations became a symbol of how predators could hide behind wholesome images. In 2017, the Court of Appeal overturned 3 of his 12 convictions, not just one. Harris served 3 years before being released in 2017. His health deteriorated after release, and he died on May 10, 2023, from neck cancer at age 93. Harris never showed public remorse, maintaining to the end that he was wrongly convicted. His case, along with others from Operation Yewtree, changed how British society viewed allegations against celebrities and emphasized that fame provides no immunity from accountability. Our final case takes us to South Africa, where a national hero's fall from grace captivated the world. Oscar Pistorius. Oscar Pistorius was called Blade Runner, a double amputee sprinter who competed against able-bodied athletes at the highest levels. Born with a congenital condition requiring amputation of both legs below the knee before his first birthday, Pistorius defied expectations to become a Paralympic champion and Olympic competitor. His story inspired millions worldwide. But on Valentine's Day 2013, that inspiring narrative ended in tragedy. In the early hours of February 14, 2013, Pistorius fired 4 shots through a locked bathroom door at his Pretoria home. Behind that door was his girlfriend, Riva Steenkamp, a 29-year-old model and law school graduate. 3 bullets struck her, and she died at the scene from her injuries. What was Pistorius's explanation? He claimed he thought an intruder had entered his home and was hiding in the bathroom. Given South Africa's high crime rates, his defense argued this was a reasonable fear. Pistorius testified that he fired in self-defense, believing he was protecting himself and Steenkamp from a home invasion. He said he didn't realize Steenkamp was in the bathroom until after firing. Prosecutors presented a different narrative, that Pistorius and Steenkamp had argued. She fled to the bathroom, and he fired through the door in anger. Neighbors reported hearing screams before the gunshots, though whether these were Steenkamp's or Pistorius's high-pitched cries became disputed. Forensic evidence became crucial. Bullet trajectories through the door, the positions where Steenkamp was hit, and the angle of fire all became subjects of expert testimony. Text messages between the couple showed some tension, though not necessarily indicative of violence. The initial 2014 trial resulted in conviction for culpable homicide rather than murder, essentially a finding of reckless killing without intent. Pistorius was sentenced to 5 years, but prosecutors appealed, arguing the judge had misapplied the law regarding intent. In December 2015, South Africa's Supreme Court of Appeal upgraded the conviction to murder, finding that Pistorius must have known firing through the door could kill whoever was behind it. The court rejected his claim that he believed he was acting in lawful self-defense. Resentencing occurred in July 2016. The Supreme Court of Appeal increased the sentence to 15 years, the minimum for murder in South Africa. However, they subtracted the time he had already served, resulting in a remaining term of 13 years and 5 months. Throughout the proceedings, the Steenkamp family maintained that Pistorius knew Riva was behind the door. They participated in victim-offender dialogues as part of South Africa's restorative justice process, though they've stated these brought limited closure. Oscar Pistorius was released on parole on January 5, 2024. He had served more than half of his sentence, which made him eligible under South African law. His parole conditions include community service and restrictions on his movements. This was all from our side today. Thanks for watching. Click here to check out another video.